Amen. Will you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, may the words of my mouth and meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. There's this really weird reality about life that most people freeze in a crisis. If there are 100 people at the scene of a major incident, the general understanding is that about 80 of those people will freeze. They will freeze out of panic, out of fear, a lack of knowledge of what to do next, but none of that matters. The result is always the same. They will freeze. They will not actively seek to address or resolve the situation. Out of the remaining 20 people, they will stand at opposites. 10 of those people will react so poorly that they actively make the situation worse. The other 10, these other 10 remaining people, they will take some form of leadership. These are the folks who, in most cases, absent any sort of established responsibility or authority, they are the folks who will direct what happens next. Clear a path. Call 911, ask for a doctor, check a pulse, perform CPR. They will try to lead the way. My example was about a crowd of 100 people, but we are rarely that lucky. What if the group at this scene is just 10 people, or 5, or 3? What if the issue isn't an emergency, but a family matter? That 80-10-10 rule plays out in way more places than you might think. I have watched people plan weddings and funerals, and in every single case, most of the folks involved were truly just there. They did what they were told to do. Someone in the group was beyond counterproductive, and someone else took charge. There are, of course, trade-offs for any dynamic like that, but time and time again, we find ourselves in those dynamics. Every situation that was different, and so the big tough guy who often runs the crowd, or his team with a heavy fist, might run away at the sight of blood or disorder. The quiet person who keeps their head down, in a moment of crisis, they might just know where all the exits are, who to call, when to call them. They might become the loudest voice. Our predispositions and preconceived notions of who and how we are don't matter very much in a moment of real strife, in a moment of survival. No, in that moment, it's fight or flight, sink or swim, run or walk. We've spent a lot of time with Ruth this year, much more than usual for a church year. I think we've actually engaged with some part of Ruth's story almost every month this year. But as we make our way towards beginning again, we return back to Ruth. And we start with an introduction first to Naomi, and we're offered an overview of what I would call a family crisis. Naomi's family is dead. Her husband has died, her 2 sons have gotten married, and then within 10 years, both of her sons are dead too. 10 years. It was her husband and her sons, all gone. So what we're left with is Naomi and her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And so you have 3 women living in a world where they are expected to have men. This elderly woman, Naomi, rightfully bitter, and these 2 women who are kind of her daughters-in-law, but without her sons attached, there's really no relationship left standing between the 3 of these women. In fact, custom of the day says that upon the passing of your husband, you should return back to your home of birth. But this isn't ordinary, because all the men are dead. I don't think crisis cares very much for custom. I asked before about the 80-10-10 rule working well with a group of 100 people. But what about just 3? Orpah, I think, represents the great number of people who freeze and need direction. You can tell in the story she's happy to go along with Naomi and Ruth for a bit, but the second that Naomi says, "Go away from here," Orpah says, "Okay." She cries a bit. She gives Naomi a hug. She gives Ruth a hug, but all the same, she's been told to do a thing, and she does exactly that. Orpah leaves. Naomi is a little more interesting, I think, because she does take charge as a matter, I think, of age and just how we often defer to folks who are older than us. But Naomi's leadership is very clearly counterproductive. She needs help, but she's saying, go away. This would be like choking, but actively waving people away from you who are trying to help you and save your life. You're in charge, but the orders that you are giving just don't quite make any sense. Ruth is the other extreme. Absent any sort of established responsibility or authority, acknowledging the family bond that they once shared has indeed been severed, Ruth directs what happens next. Do not tell me to go or stop following you. I will go wherever you go. I will die wherever you die. And should even death do us apart, may God punish me. Crisis doesn't care very much for custom, and neither do our modern stats about how we respond to crisis. But this really could have gone many different ways. What if Orpah had stayed instead of Ruth? What if both Orpah and Ruth had turned away? What if Naomi was successful in telling people to leave her alone? I ask those questions because, as I hinted at in our weekly e-news note, a lot of what we do here in worship is about giving us better tools to put in our toolbox of faith to understand how we might live this life. So the story of Ruth, Naomi, and Orpah, too, Orpah's almost always left out. It's a story that really is a tool for us, a lens through which we might better help understand a later story that changes and still changes the world. As Reverend Liz discussed in the Story for All Ages, Ruth becomes the matriarch of the house of David. Orpah disappears from our biblical story, but she does pop back up in Jewish literature. There are many midrash that talk about Orpah's role and what happens after this moment. Orpah becomes the matriarch for the house of Goliath. So we have Ruth, the house of David, Orpah, the house of Goliath. We know how that story ends. And we know, too, that the lineage of Christ is traced first to David and then to Ruth. How different might all this have been had Ruth not stood steadfast in the truth that we can't go alone? How different might our engagement today be? Perhaps it'd be the book of Orpah, if Ruth had left and Orpah had stayed instead. What does it say about us that we have been really mostly okay for thousands of years to just cast Orpah to the side as though she has no place in the story anymore? The truth that Ruth represents, again, that we cannot go alone, speaks across time and space and calls anew to us today. Earlier this week, as you may have seen on Facebook, most of the staff and a few Plymouth Harbor volunteers here at Central completed CPR training. And when we started the physical training, our instructor had us get into the right position and just start. 30 seconds of compressions, pressing about 1.5 to 2 inches into the chest, 2 breaths, and then repeat, and repeat, and repeat. Within about 90 seconds, all of our paces slowed, our arms were a little wobbly, and at least one person, I won't say who, seemed ready to just give up. And the instructor said, "Don't worry, this was intentional." Here's what I noticed. Some of you all are going way too fast. That's why your arms are tired. Some of you are pushing way too hard. That's why you seem exhausted. Here are 2 tips for being successful. If you want to stay on pace, you can sing the song "Stayin' Alive" in your head. There is a second song that does work. It's Baby Shark. And I will just say that if I need CPR and need the person performing it, please do not sing Baby Shark to me. I think I'd rather just go. But the second tip to be successful with CPR is that if you get tired, you should ask someone else to step in, either trained or help walk them through the steps. At least one person on our team said, "I don't do well in these situations. I will probably mess something up for real, so I'm glad that we're all doing this together." Here again, that notion that we are together. And that if one of us is actively doing the work that needs to be done, perhaps we need to tag out and tag someone else in. That even in saving a life, it's really not great to try to do that alone. But the person who said they don't do well in these situations, they would mess the CPR up for real, I don't believe that for a second. Because when the goal is staying alive, our preconceived notions of who and how we are in the world won't matter. I think that if we hold fast to the sacred truth that we can't go alone, that we will find within ourselves a limitless capacity to rise to the occasion and do something different in this life. In our devotionals group this morning, we kept asking the question, we ended on the question, why would Ruth do any of this? There's no obligation, no expectation. In fact, the only thing she's expected to do is leave. And yet she chooses to stay. And not just stay, but also travel. To take a journey with someone else who she has no real attachment to anymore. There within Ruth, I think, is the limitless capacity to rise to the occasion, to do something different, to do something new, to be radical, defy the odds, to say, in some small part, I will do what I can to alter or change the material conditions of this world. Not because I have to, but because I might. Because I have something here that says it's worth it. This kind of care, compassion, grace, this kind of love is worth reaching into over and over and over again and pouring itself out into those around me. Yes, indeed, I think that in moments of strife or crisis, we will find within ourselves a limitless capacity to rise to the occasion, that we will not turn back nor turn away. Come what may, we will commit ourselves to one another to stay together. We will do all this and more, if only to affirm the simple truth that we cannot go alone. So for providing an example of this truth and a way in which we might better live this life, thanks be to Ruth. Thanks be to Naomi. Thanks be to Orpah too. And thanks be to God.